about a worldwide flood, of a worldwide flood, of a worldwide flood. If there really was a worldwide flood, what would the evidence be?
Hi, my name is Mark Finkbeiner, and I would like to give my testimony about how I got involved in the creation science movement. It actually started out when I was in kindergarten. When I was in kindergarten, I was about 5 years old, and I already knew that I wanted to be a scientist and a mathematician. I was fascinated by looking at mathematical equations and scientific things. And as I was in elementary school, I always excelled when it came to science. It was like the writing was on the wall for me, because every time when we studied science or astronomy or geology or even rocket science in school, it always seemed to work out for me. But when I finally got into about the 6th grade, some things changed. First of all, though, my parents, they bought me a chemistry lab when I was in about the 5th or 6th grade. And I got all these science books and chemistry books, and then things began to change, unfortunately. You wanted to, as you get older, you want to be cool, and you want to fit in, and then sometimes, your peers, they'll make fun of you when you're really excited about something. And then the other problem is, all I was ever taught was evolution in school. And I thought, well, isn't it strange how at church you're never taught the creation account, but you go to school and you're taught evolution? And so I began to think, well, I guess then maybe science is not for us Christians, because I was taught by even some of the preachers, as well as some of the school teachers that taught evolution, that you have to take creation as faith and evolution as science. And so I just gave up the pursuit, and I went after other things. And it wasn't until I was about 25 years old, I was in my bedroom, I was listening to the Christian radio station, and I heard a man talking about creation versus evolution. And this preacher, he was talking about all the scientific evidences that support creation. Well, I'm going to tell you something, that changed my life forever. And that was really the first meeting I really had with God, and I thought, Lord, what do you want me to do now? I mean, I have this information, and what do you want me to do? Well, I got involved in other things. I didn't really know what to do with it, and after I learned that science and the Bible do go together, I heard about a man by the name of Dr. Donald Chittick, that he was going to be speaking at a church in Othello. And I thought, well, I'm going to go there and I'm going to see him. And I went there, and it's interesting because when I arrived at that church, there was nobody in the church except the speaker, Donald Chittick. And he was just sitting there by himself in the pew. And I walked up to him and I introduced myself to him, and I says, I want to do what you're doing one day. And he looked at me with a very stern look, and he says, you have no idea what I have been through to get to where I am at. And it's funny because as soon as he said that was kind of the end of the conversation, and then everybody started filing into the church. I didn't realize later how prophetic that would be, because I did feel like the Lord was leading me into a creation science ministry, and I didn't know how that was going to work out. I was involved in other things. I had different occupations going on at the time. And so anyway, at age 25, that is when everything changed for me. Now I want to go back a few years. When I was about out of high school, I was about ready to graduate. I was really into hot rods, cars, dune buggies, dirt bikes, tall four-wheel drive pickups, and all that. And I had a bunch of dirt bikes, I had a fast car, I had a tall four-wheel drive pickup, I had all these things, and I was expecting all these things to bring me happiness. And I found out as time went on that things do not, temporal things, material possessions, they don't bring you happiness. And I remember one day I was in the shop and I was building this dune buggy. Now this dune buggy was the same thing that they race in the Baja 1000. and the Baja 500 and the Mint 400. You know, it had all the bells and whistles and everything, and I was building this thing from the ground up. I had ordered a dune buggy chassis, frame, roll cage, all that stuff. And I learned how to mount the torsion housing to it and the front end to it, and learned how to bolt and weld everything together. And one night I was in the shop and I was building this dune buggy, and I had cut out these steel pieces of metal to adapt the torsion housing to the frame. And I was grinding on this metal, and I remember I was so excited about this. I was so excited about what I was doing that as the sparks, as they landed on my arm, I didn't care how much it was burning my arm because I was so excited about what I was doing. And the Lord began to speak to me, and He says, Mark, now if you could ever learn to love me as much as you love doing what you're doing, you will be able to do great things. And I will never forget that meeting that I had there with the Lord. And that really made me change. And so I thought about that, and I never forgot about that, because that is the kind of fervency. When you have love for the Lord like that, then you are able to go through anything. And then when I was going to Columbia Basin College, I was majoring in criminal justice. I had to take this class called Drugs in Society. This was just one of the classes I had to take to graduate and get my criminal justice degree, because I was thinking about going into law enforcement. And when I was in this class, I soon realized that this class is full of people who are recovering from addictions. And I remember the teacher was always talking about, how can we solve the problems in this world? How can we solve the problems? The drug problems, the crime problems, and all this. And I noticed nobody had any answers. And so I was kind of getting fed up with this. And of course, it was, they were teaching liberalism and humanism and all that. And so one day, the Lord impressed it upon me, why don't you just go to the teacher and tell him that you do have some of the answers to solve the problems in this world? And so I did. I mean, this is totally out of character for me. I knew very little about the Bible, very little about science, but I was trying to learn. I had gotten saved when I was about 11 or 12 years old, and now I was like about 26, 27 years old when this was happening. And so I went to this teacher and I says, we've been talking about all the problems in the world, the drug problems, the crime problems. And I said, nobody ever seems to have any answers. And he looks at me and he says, well, do you have the answers? I says, well, yeah, I have some answers. He says, okay, then why don't you give us a presentation and give us some of the answers? And that just shocked me right there, and I thought, oh boy, well, okay. And so I told him, I says, I'll go home and I'll think about it. And what I really meant was I'm going to go home and I'm going to pray about it. And the more I prayed about it, the more I realized, you know what, this is what the Lord wants me to do. And so the teacher, he actually gave me an opportunity to present before the class how to solve the drug problem and the crime problem. And so what I did is I gave a presentation based upon the fact that evolution is the foundation for drug use and crime. Well, the Lord worked it all out to where everybody now is going to give a speech. And so it turns out that I was the last one to give a speech on the last day of class. And I'm telling you, it all worked out. It worked out beautifully. I gave about a 10 to 15 minute talk. And I'm telling you that when I was giving this talk about evolution being the foundation for drug use and crime, the students in the class, they were just leaning forward like this. Some of them were just holding their mouths open. Some were just really angry and they're sitting back like this. People had never heard this before. I showed where the 8 men were frauds and they were bad science. And I gave different quotes to show how there were various evolutionists that used evolution to support drug use in college and stuff like that, and they couldn't believe it. And actually, when I got done giving that speech, they actually clapped for my speech. There were some people who were very angry. And I thought, Lord, I tell you, and I'll tell you, I had total peace in this, and this is totally out of character for me to stand up before a secular class in a public school, a government college, and to give a talk like this. But I'm telling you, it was the Lord that gave me the strength and the ability to do this. And I could not believe the peace that I had. I had peace that surpassed all understanding. And so this was kind of the beginning of my creation science ministry. And then, to make a long story short, and I'm jumping through a lot of stuff here, I eventually got a job working as a park ranger. When I got this job, I was then able to do more things in science and the Bible. And as long as I kept everything, as long as I pursued, and I noticed as long as I was pursuing the science and Bible, the Lord would always bless. He would always open up doors. And here was something else that was very out of character for me. You see, because I was in law enforcement work at one time, I came to the point to where I had very bad feelings towards gang members and drug users, you know, and stuff like that. And so I developed these very bad feelings towards them, and I wanted to get out of law enforcement, and so I did. And it was just a few years after that, okay, I got this job as a park ranger, and then the Lord instilled into me to go to our local jail and minister there. And the Lord opened up the doors, and everything just worked out. And every other Thursday, I would go there, and I would minister to the inmates about creation versus evolution, and showing them how evolution is the foundation for crime and for drug use and all the wickedness and everything. And I'm telling you, that was a big hit. And I'm not bragging on myself, I'm bragging on the Lord, but that was the class that everybody wanted to come to. They couldn't believe what they had heard. And this brought a lot of salvations. A lot of people made professions of faith throughout the years. And I did that for about 5 years. And the Lord called me out of that. And I started to do other things. And while I've had this job, I got this new boss who was a really good guy. And he was supporting me in everything that I do. And so in about 2003, my wife and I, we went through a very difficult trial. And it wasn't a marital problem or anything, but there were some things that came into our lives, and I didn't know how we were going to get through this. I told my wife, I says, you know, we're going to have to just get down and read the Bible every day and pray about this. And this was the greatest thing that could have ever happened. Because by about October of 2003, the trial started about I think the beginning of June, and then about October of 2003, I began to forgive some people that had taken advantage of me. And I've never been able to do this. And it was through a miracle through God that I was able to forgive some things that had happened. And when I was able to do that, I had revival for the first time in my life, real revival. And I knew exactly what the Lord wanted me to do. I mean, it was confirmed to me that the Lord wanted me to really teach the Bible and science. And I didn't know how we were going to do this. I didn't know how this was going to work. You know, I have a full-time job, and I wanted to go to college, and I wanted to get a science degree. And it just seemed like the Lord kept shutting doors in going back to college and getting a science degree. One day I told my wife, I says, you know, I don't know how we're going to do this. I don't know how we're going to afford this. But I'm going to go out, I'm going to buy a laptop computer, I'm going to buy a video projector, and somehow the Lord is going to help us to afford it. And I am going to go out and I'm going to start speaking on creation science. Well, my wife looked at me and she says, okay, I don't know how that's going to happen, but okay, if that's what you really think. Well, guess what happened? On a Friday, I told my wife, I says, let's go to Best Buy and we're going to shop for video projectors and laptop computers. And she says, are you sure you want to do that? I says, yep, for some reason we need to do this. And so we went to Best Buy, and I was shopping around, and lo and behold, somebody comes up behind me, taps me on the shoulder, and it was a person that I had not seen for years, and his name was Alan. And he asked me what I'm doing, and I says, man, I says, you can't believe all the things that the Lord is doing in my life. I'm in the midst of revival. Everything is clear as to what I'm supposed to do. I've never been so happy and so content in my life. I says, well, the Lord has called me into creation science ministry. And he says, you know what? Have you ever considered teaching at this homeschool co-op called Echo? And I says, no, I've never heard of it. He says, well, I'll tell you what, my wife is a board member, and I'll talk to her and I'll get the arrangements made, and you can have an interview with the board members, and maybe you can start teaching creation science at this homeschool co-op. And I'm telling you, everything just worked out. 1, 2, 3. In fact, my boss was good with it. He says, okay, as long as you work extra hours each day at work to make up for it, then on Fridays you can teach at this homeschool co-op, and it's each Friday morning, and it's about 6 months a year, and it's 3 hours every Friday, and there's 4 classes. So I teach science from kindergarten up through high school. And now I've been doing this now for many years. And the Lord, you can't believe how much the Lord has blessed. There's people who have given me money. They've given me donations to get science equipment, and we're doing science demonstrations that even some of the public schools won't even do. And it's just amazing how the Lord has blessed in this area. And also, there was a time in the past where the Lord even gave me a radio program. I had a radio program on creation science for a few months. And then in 2008, and this is something, now I'm hoping that there's some atheists, some people that have been offended in church. I hope that they listen to this. You know, one thing I have learned about atheism is that most people who become atheists do not become atheists because of the evidence. They become atheists because they got angry about something. They got angry at church. They got offended about something, and so they get upset and they turn their backs on God, and then they become an atheist or an unbeliever, or they just leave church completely. Okay? Well, in 2008, my wife and I, again, we went through a very difficult time in a church. And our church, the church that I was in, that I was involved with, and we're not there anymore, we got a pastor that was not who he said he was. In fact, I have no idea if the man was even a Christian. And it was really bad. And as I began to find out who he was, I found out that there was some deception involved when he was candidating to be the pastor of this church. Now, I want to tell you something. There are some people in this world that if they had the same experience that I had with this so-called pastor in this church, there are people that would become atheists over it. And you see, I chose not to depart from the faith, okay? Because you see, I don't look at what people are doing and what they're doing wrong. My focus is on Jesus Christ, not on what people are not on the inconsistencies of so-called believers or the hypocrisies of so-called believers. My focus is on Christ, on the Word of God. And so, anyway, it was very upsetting, and when we left that church, I was totally drained. And to tell you the truth, at that time, I didn't really even want to read the Bible. I felt betrayed, and we were betrayed. And anyway, my wife told me, she says, well, let's go to this church over here. And I says, you know, I just don't even really want to go to church right now. I just felt so drained. I just felt like, okay, the creation science ministry is over. It's done. And I don't know how I'm ever going to pick myself up. And so eventually we went to this church, and it's Temple Baptist Church. And boy, I tell you, when I first went there, I felt very drained. And I met the pastor, and I remember saying to him, I says, wow, you're sure nice to us. And he looks at me and he says, well, aren't I supposed to be nice to you? He says, I am the pastor, you know. I says, okay, well, yeah, right. Yes, that's the way pastors are supposed to be. They're supposed to be nice people. And so it's been a while since I've seen that. And so anyway, when we went there, I wanted nothing more to do with ministry. Now, I knew I wasn't going to quit on God. We were going to continue to be faithful. We were going to yoke up with another church and become members. And after about 3 or 4 months, I finally came to the point to where, I am really interested again in getting into creation science ministry. And so I called the pastor. I says, this is what I used to do. This is what I would like to do. And I says, I would like to become a member here. And we talked about it. And to make a long story short, the Lord, He opened up doors huge. I mean, just huge doors. See, what I had done is I had let go and I had let God. And I let God really take control here. I let go of all my wants, all my desires, all my aspirations. And when I did that, God took over. And from that, guess what all has happened? I got a creation science club called the Tri-Cities Creation Science Club. And we meet the fourth Tuesday. And now we're doing it about every other month, the fourth Tuesday of each month. And if you want to find out more about that, you just need to call me or go to my website, scienceversusevolution.com, okay? And now I have a field trip business. I teach at ECHO, the homeschool co-op, and there are people who are donating money to the cause all the time. I've got a museum going. The museum is picking up, and we're doing very significant science demonstrations at the Creation Science Club. I mean, things are just blooming, and it's not uncommon. Sometimes we'll get 90 people to come to the Creation Science Club on a Tuesday night, and there's just so many things going on, and the church has given me a budget to work with, and it's just amazing the doors that the Lord has opened up. And then to think of the fact, my wife and I, we've not been able to have children. And so we've looked into adoption, and we thought, well, how are we going to afford this, And one day, it was in 2008 after we left that church and we went to this new church. We were in Yellowstone, and we had been pursuing adoption for about a year. And it just seemed like it wasn't going to work out. And we were in Yellowstone, and we were there for about a week and a half, and we were doing a lot of exploring. And then we went to the Museum of the Rockies there in Montana. And as we were going to the Museum of the Rockies, I was turning a right turn to go into that museum, and we got hit from behind. A car hit us from behind, pushed us through the intersection, and as soon as that happened, I had total peace about it, and I said, Lord, there is a good reason for why this happened. I don't know why, but there is a good reason. Well, to make a long story short, guess what happened? We ended up getting enough money out of that accident to adopt a beautiful boy. I'm going to tell you something again. I had to learn to give up, to let go and let God. I remember one day, it was after this collision that we had, and I says, it's not going to work. I don't know where the money's going to come from. It's so expensive, and I had just given up. The very day I gave up, we got this phone call from a person. It was an anonymous caller, and she says, I know of a child that's going to need to be adopted. The child's not been born yet, and I'm telling you, everything just worked out 1, 2, 3, and then about a year later, we got the money back from this insurance, and all the money that we got from that insurance, from that collision, paid for the adoption. And people were giving us money, sending us money anonymously, and everything was paid for. I mean, it's just amazing, the miracles that God has worked and has given me this Creation Science Club. And then, guess what? It was probably about a year ago now, I got this idea to go to this TV station and just ask if this TV station here would do some advertising for the Tri-Cities Creation Science Club. I had no idea that it was going to turn into a TV program. So anyway, the owner of this station calls me and he says, well, I'll talk to you about it. And, he was telling me how expensive it is for advertising and all this. And he says, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. He says, let's just do a half-hour interview of your ministry, and we'll just see what happens. And so we did this 30-minute interview, and then I get a call back, and he says, I'll tell you what, after looking at that interview and it being on TV, I know 2 other guys, and Greg Morgan and Dick Temple. He says, I'll tell you what, let's do a TV series on creation versus evolution. And that is how this TV program got started. I wasn't even looking for this, and everything just falls in my lap. And I'm telling you, I've gotten calls from different places to go speak here and there. I've spoke at different schools here in the Tri-Cities. I even got an invitation to speak at a museum in Baker City, Oregon, I think is where it was. And I've gotten other calls to speak at colleges and schools in Seattle and churches and things like that. And I tell you, I'm so busy, I don't hardly know what to do with myself. And so anyway, these are just some of the miracles that God has worked out. And I just want to tell you here in the last few minutes that we have is that parents, I cannot urge you enough to train up your children in the way that they should go, so that when they are old, they will not depart from it. I exhort you to do that. Because today, people, we are living in a society where there are so many children who are wayward. They don't know where they're supposed to go. They don't know where they're turned to. There's this belief that all you have to do is be a good example. Well, being an example is good, but eventually you got to train them. You got to teach them about life. You need to teach them from Scripture how to behave, how to relate to things, how to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And if a child is not taught right from the beginning, then when they get old, they're going to stumble around, they're going to have a very tough time, and people, this is what's wrong with this country. This is why there are so many kids that grow up in church and they're exiting the church. They're exiting the church that they grew up in, and they are leaving the faith that was once delivered to the saints. And so I urge parents, don't just be a good example, and that's a good thing, but you also need to train them so that when they get older, when they go through tough times, they won't get offended and then leave church, leave the faith, okay? And anyway, this testimony that I've just brought to you, and I have about a minute left here, is just a synopsis of what has happened. Another thing I just want to tell you is that there was a time when I really trusted in material possessions to make me happy. And I'm going to tell you, material possessions don't make you happy. And that's where I learned to read the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes, it's a confession of Solomon, who at one time, who was the richest man to ever live. He had more wisdom, he had more knowledge, and yet he fell. And he drifted away from God, he did horrible things, and the book of Ecclesiastes is Solomon's confession, or his repentance, and telling us that the only thing that's ever going to matter in the end is what you do for Christ. It is following Christ and obeying His commandments. And when I came to that point, I've had contentment that I've never had before. And you know, I don't own the cattle that's living on 1,000 hills. I don't have millions of dollars, but I can tell you I'm more content than many millionaires. And I am very privileged to be able to bring you my testimony, and if you would like me to come and speak at your church and give my extended testimony or speak on creation science, you can get a hold of me at 967-5625, or you can go to my website, scienceversusevolution.com. Thank you.
The Bible talks about a worldwide flood, of a worldwide flood, of a worldwide flood. If there really was a worldwide flood, what would the evidence be? Billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down the water all over the earth. Billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down the water all over the earth. Well, there really was a worldwide flood. Just look at the stony curse, with billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down the water all over the earth. The Bible talks about Noah and the ark in a worldwide flood, where the world was judged. If there really was a worldwide flood.